Okay, let's do this.
Hi, Benji here, and this is why white people can't experience racism. White people can experience racial prejudice for their skin colour, and this is always unacceptable. But racial prejudice on an individual level should not be confused with racism, which operates on a societal level, contributing to lasting systemic disadvantages for large groups of people. Racism uses our societal power structures in order to drive these systemic disadvantages, so it only works for the group in society that has power against the group that does not, and due to centuries of societal structures that have privileged and centered whiteness globally, that group with power is white people. Therefore, white people simply can't experience racism. To say that they can, or that reverse racism exists, is to ignore the realities of power and privilege present in our society, and to erase the struggles communities of colour face every day, specifically due to the colour of their skin. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Okay, so there's a lot there. Basically, what he's saying is that we white people can't experience even individualized racism, right? He uses the definition that compounds individual and systemic racism. Now, fun fact at this point, Oakland, California is actually systemically oppressing white people by not allowing them to participate in their universal basic income, even if they do meet every other qualification. Skin color literally is something that makes it so white people cannot benefit. But we'll move past that because that is kind of an outlier in the United States. It is an outlier. Now, here's the thing. I know there was a lot of confidence being displayed from this person. What you guys have to understand is that fundamentally, words are social constructs, right? We have the ability to decide what they mean. You could literally make the word fart equal money. Very seriously. But we don't, right? But you could. What that means is that we get to have a conversation about the definition. And as of right now, the definition simply doesn't support what he's saying. The definition is prejudice based on skin color. That's it. There's also part in there that says typically. It'll say typically marginalized or minority group. Typical doesn't mean always. So right now, the definition of racism doesn't support at all what he's saying. So confidence is a little bit too much. What he's doing, though, is he's using the sociology term for racism. And that is that you compound individual and systemic racism. Now, sociology is the study of society, which means obviously you're going to focus on it as a whole because you're not focusing on individuals in sociology, the study of society, right? However, we are individuals, so we should be focusing on individual interactions. It makes sense, right? Now, I, for context, believe that there's individual and systemic racism are two different things, right? Individual racism, anybody can experience. Systemic racism is something that white people, specifically in America, generally cannot experience, except for Oakland, right? And really the conversation is which one is better for society? And I would make the argument that his definition is worse for society across the board. There's not a single benefit from saying white people cannot experience individualized racism, right? All it does is it sets unequal standards, okay? And in the future, when there is no racism, when we finally defeat racism, we're now going to have a definition that actually says white people are less than. That's what this does, right? And people are sitting there like, oh, well, that's not going to happen for a long time. Really? Well, the white population in America is 60%. It used to be 90% like 50 or 60 years ago. That's not a bad thing. It means literally nothing to me. Other than if we set unequal standards for white people now, 50 years from now, when white people are a big minority, all of a sudden, it's going to be acceptable to hate white people, even when they're a minority group. In fact, I think it's 2045 is when white people are expected to be less than half the population. Again, I don't care about that. The skin color doesn't matter unless we're setting unequal standards, which is what this is going to do. All right? It doesn't really make any sense. Now, he talked about the erasure of struggles in blacks, like, you know, in black communities and BIPOC communities and whatever. First and foremost, I'd say just by coupling black people in with people of color, you're already erasing black struggles. So I don't know. The fact that you don't know that is a little bizarre to me. But here's the thing. Who do we need to teach the existence of systemic racism to? Usually it's going to be wealthier white people, right? Or really just white people in general, right? Well, how do you do that when you set up an antagonistic standard? It doesn't make any sense. You want white people to acknowledge systemic and individual racism. You want white people to acknowledge that there's been a system in America that's oppressed black people. From a lot of white people's perspectives, they treat black people equally on an individual level. So they don't see systemic oppression. But when you say, hey, you can't, nobody can be racist towards you because you're you're a powerhouse and they're just a truck driver working 50 hours a week, all of a sudden they're going to tell you to go fuck yourself, right? Your message isn't going to go through. However, if they take the time to listen and you talk about that individually they can experience racism, but systemically they can't, they might be more open to it. In fact, they will be much more open to that definition, the one that the definition I support, over the one that you support. All right. Realistically speaking, not everybody has time to sit down and think about theory like this. Okay. All right. People work real jobs. Now, here's the kind of the root of what we're talking about when it comes to racism, as to why this person compounds racism the way that they do. Generally speaking, white racism to black people is based either on some kind of supremacy or based on stereotypes that exist because of systemic oppression, right? Like stereotypes that black people are that they're, poor and gangsters and whatnot. That comes from a culture created due to a systematic denial of opportunity over a long period of time, right? Which means, and then when it comes to black people, their hatred of white people generally will come from that's systemic racism, being in a system that oppresses black people because they're black. That was created by white people, right? And then there's also points that maybe there's supremacy. That's generally an outlier. The reason I bring this up is because you can make a reasonable argument that overall, not individually, but overall, black people have more of a reason to hate white people than the reverse. Black people's racism towards white people is more understandable than white people's racism towards black people, right? That's where this comes from, and I get it. But think about it from this way. Think about it this. I'm going to give you a little bit of an analogy. Remove skin color. Imagine I walked up to you and I punched you in the face, right? What would you call that? You'd call that assault, right? Now imagine that I walked up and I punched you in the face because you fucked my wife. All of a sudden, it's still assault, but all of a sudden you're like, maybe it's more justifiable. That's the analogy I would use. It's still assault, but it's more reasonable. And when it comes to individual bases or the individual basis of how we treat racism in the United States, we need to bring that context in. Like I said before, it's more justifiable for a black person to be racist towards a white person than the reverse. And we already do that in society. It's all over TikTok. You see white face is acceptable where black face isn't. I agree with that. That makes perfect sense to me. But it's still racism, right? It's still racism. Right? And we can't treat all individuals as if they represent the entire system. Stereotyping all white people as the racist oppressors, even though it was just rich white people in the past, is just as racist as stereotyping black people for being impoverished gangsters. Right? It's all stereotyping. It's all racism. Right? And what this really does is it just sets a higher social standard for white people. That's all it does. Is white people, nobody can be racist towards you, but you can be racist towards everybody. So you're setting a high standard for white people, which is having a negative impact because we're not setting those same social standards for other people of color or BIPOC people, which is why you're seeing racism from Asian and black people back and forth on TikTok. All of a sudden, we're finally starting to recognize that racism can go through the system with a different other people of color and black people and whatnot. But we need to set higher social standards. Right? So, not for nothing, at the end of the day, once we go through all white people, soon, we're already seeing it though. We're already seeing it. There's so much hatred towards white people that light-skinned black people are starting to get targeted. We've created the term colorism, right? Which of course is, it's insane, right? Now I understand that colorism is more complicated than that. Light-skinned black people can be colorist towards, dark-skinned black people, but vice versa. But we're already creating divisions within the black community, because there's less and less to complain about with the white community. So now it's not just white people receiving some kind of bigotry in some instances, but now even light-skinned black people are receiving some kind of bigotry. And this is what happens when you overly focus on skin color. At the end of the day, we need to focus less on redefining words to make black people feel better. And not even black people. It's usually well-educated black people who probably weren't impacted by systemic racism. This guy is a very well-educated individual, right? He looks young. This is one of those things. He's a young man, very educated, he speaks very well, This individual probably hasn't been a victim of systemic racism, at the very least, to the same degree as most other black people in the United States. I'm telling you that right now. We look at outcomes. We look at outcomes when it comes to who's oppressed. And if you are performing well in society as a young person, you're definitely not somebody who's really experienced systemic oppression, right? If you're well-spoken and you come from a middle-class family, you're not oppressed, okay? And the problem is that you have people weaponizing oppression and like parading it around and being divisive, but nobody's talking about any solutions. Hey, what's blackface? Oh, white people can't experience racism. Oh, cultural appropriation. Where's the video about some form of reparations? Where's the video about universal basic income? Where's the video about dismantling the systems in America that disproportionately negatively impact black people? They're not here. They're not here. It's all divisiveness. I'm just saying.
Hi, Ben.
I'm just saying. We really do need to be colorblind as a society. And what that means is we need to focus as little on race as possible. All right? Possible, meaning we need to acknowledge the individual struggles of different people of color and black people and indigenous people. Right? We need to do that. But also, individually, we should be colorblind. That's the thing. Individually, we should all be colorblind. There shouldn't be anything. I'm not going to walk into a store and say, oh, black person, you can cut the line and get on my knee and put an arm up. No, that'd be racist, honestly. That'd be demeaning. All right? From an individual level, we need to focus on being colorblind. While systemically, on a societal perspective, we need to acknowledge systemic oppression so that we can implement legislation so that we can defeat systemic racism. Hey everyone, if you liked that video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to follow my Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and TikTok. All links are in the description. Also, check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me even more than you already do. Thank you so much, everyone. I love you all.